convicted by the court of district magistrate and arrested for 22 days and got a bail. An appeal is made in High Court against the order of the lower court. It is pending for a year or so. In the meanwhile, K has been invited to join independent director, board director. Is 164 attractive? I think it is very clear. The first sentence of this question is not relevant. Whether the political activist, whether the complaint against him is because of political vendetta, whatever it is. The point here is that he has been convicted. Law deals with only convictions. It does not deal with the background why he has been paid to the court. So long as he is convicted, yes, the rule kicks in. But then it's not clear from the question whether the conviction was more than 6 months or less than 6 months. If it is less than 6 months, he will get exemptions. If it is more than 6 months, irrespective of the fact whether it is on bail or not, he will be attracted to disqualification. You would have served for, let's say, conviction is for more than 1 year. He serves 15 days and then he has been granted a bail. Bail is not exonerating or reducing the punishment otherwise. He is able to, conviction still sticks to him. One thing is not in jail, he is outside the jail. That's all the only difference is. And therefore, the answer is that if it is more than 6 months, he is attracting the disqualification. Being on bail is not of any relevance in this case. And therefore, he will be disqualified. The second thing is what kind of precaution we take while certifying from DR12 upon how can one ensure that the companies in which the person is director has not defrauded the company. I was a company secretary myself in some companies and we used to take declaration for the director himself. That's the best way I can always believe because he the person is supposed to say that I am working in so and so companies and none of the companies have actually defaulted. He will certify and give. I mean, in stature of director, I don't think we can question him. Whatever he says, this as an undertaking kind of truthful statement, we should take it as the first thing. Maybe its format of certificate should be like this, saying that he should involve himself. Undertaking should be very strong. That's what the language should be. Reference to MCA site will be helpful. There could be information on defaults. RBI site may be helpful as for the NBFC section. That may give you. CIBIL may also give you some information about default made to the company. To the extent we can rely on these things. But I would say that director's declaration is the best insurance for us.
But sir, whether CIBIL is not available to the general public, it may be available to the institution. Whether it is available to the any individual person, because okay, RBI, MCA, the place we can refer, but CIBIL I think is not.
CIBIL we need, I think there's some paid services. Subscription.
One way how to subscribe.
Yeah.
That is actually maybe if you are taking a certificate from the director, we can ask the director to give the report. That is not a very common practice. So maybe ask him to do it.
Next question is on page 78. Question number 21. I think a very interesting question.
The question is, divided into many parts. Essentially, what the first part is that a statutory auditor has come across, one particular salesman in a particular, store of the company. He was giving wrong, information about the product, and he made them buy that product. And that is actually very common, right? Now, what is the duty? So the auditor has come across this type of a situation. What is this? The first question is that are the auditors required to report such type of fraud? Then, further questions are given that suppose he has also stolen goods of 15 lakh rupees, then what should be done? Then what if he has stolen goods of amount of rupees 1,000 rupees? The amount was only 1,000 rupees. What is to be done? Then what happens if the management says that we are inquiring into it, we have not yet found the conclusion, then what should the auditor do? And finally, again more interesting question is that suppose these facts are come out not during the normal course of work, but you are doing a limited review of the account. In that case, what happens? Now here I want to go because this situation is one of the most difficult areas for an auditor. The new requirement is that he is supposed to report a fraud directly to the central government in case of if he come across a certain fraud. With that, just let me read out the new provision in the Companies Amendment Bill. What it unfortunately, if we were expecting that they will lay down what is the minimum amount. They have not yet laid down. They have just given an enabling power now. So if this bill is passed and it becomes an act, then the amount will be soon prescribed. how much time will it take? What I think Parasbhai was telling me that the bill has not yet been even laid before Parliament. So if it's late and then we get passed in both houses, it may take some time. So what is the minimum amount? Let's keep it reasonable. Let us focus right now on what the law exists as of now. Now let us look at the relevant provisions of section 141(12). See, not all frauds are to be reported. I was talking with one of the other participants and he explained that Himanshu has already gone into a little bit detail. But I'll just repeat here that not all frauds are to be reported. And there are certain qualifications to that. First of all, it has to be a fraud. What is a fraud? We will come to later on. Then it does not have to be a fraud merely. It has to be an offense of fraud. So if you read section 447, it refers to fraud. Section 141 talks of offense of fraud. Now, you have the why I want to emphasize the offense is that offense means, the auditor has to have evidence or that there is an offense of fraud. An offense means a punishable. The point is that, the bar, the benchmark which is much more than, something else. Because, if you go to before a judge, if you want to prove a fraud, if you want to prove something else, under CB, for example, if you have not filed certain documents, there is a Supreme Court decision in case of Shriram Mutual Fund says that, the level of proof required is not much. If you have violated, there is, everything is done. But if it is fraud, if it is an offense, then it has to be proved beyond reasonable doubt. Now, I am not trying to say here that the auditor has to prove to himself, he should become in the position of a judge and prove himself that the offense is proved beyond reasonable doubt. But still I want to emphasize that it is not that suppose it comes out with a simple irregularity and he suspects a fraud, therefore he has to report. Because what we are doing is when you report a fraud, you are taking a lot of responsibility, holding a person and a company liable for fraud. So that portion is there. Then the next question is, of course, what is a fraud? This is also important. We do have guidance. If you read, for example, CARO 2003 Institute Standard, it defines fraud. It describes fraud. Fraud, I'll read out. The fraud term fraud refers to an intentional act. That's why I said, what is required? What is the difference between non-filing of a document? Shriram Mutual Fund Supreme Court decision said that if you don't file a document, mens rea does not have to be proved. Intention does not, that is not relevant at all. You did not file, penalty automatically follows. But in case of fraud, there has to be an intention act. There is an intention act by one or more individuals amongst management, those charged with governance, employees or third parties involved in the use of deception. There has to be a deception to obtain an unjust or illegal advantage. So what is understood as fraud is something very different from many other things. Fraud is there has to be an intention. Like to come to the second question, second part is what are these stolen goods. Now let's take an example. The cashier is there. He has got cash in his cash box, 15 lakh rupees cash. He runs away with the cash box. Is it a fraud? According to me, no. Theft is not a fraud. That person has not done anything deceptive. He just ran away. Some robbers come and they do. They have not done a fraud. So that type of thing, if it is purely a theft. But suppose that cashier comes back. He takes that, goes and keeps that 15 lakhs in his home, and here he accounts that 10 lakhs I give to X person, 5 lakhs I give to, so he falsifies the account. Then it is a fraud. So what has to be seen is, what has really happened in that particular case. The next 141(12) requires that it has to be against the company. Now here, if you read the question, here what it says is that this employee cheated the customer. Okay. So is that a fraud against the company? Here, again, I don't want to give a generic answer. It may depend upon the facts of the case. Why would he cheat the customer? Because he wants to, let's say, get commission. He has to do a performance, or he has to get commission from the company. If every day, whatever he sells, he will get certain commission. It means he is doing a fraud against the company also. But suppose he had done, if a person has just made some false statement to a customer in the generic course, then it may not be a fraud against the company. I'm just giving a broad guidance. In this particular case, I think it will be a fraud against the company also, because it would. He is cheating the company because he is going beyond his job description. He is doing something which would hold the company liable, and more than that, he is trying to get some consideration from the company, maybe continuation of increments or commissions or whatever. So, prima facie, I would say that this type of fraud would have to be reported. Then there is one more condition. This fraud he should have come across in the course of his audit. Now, in the course of his audit, you don't have come across all types of frauds. Suppose there is companies are doing quality fraud. I think I read somewhere that 22 karat gold is sold as 18 karat. Now, if he comes to you as a consumer is one thing. If he has bought some jewelry from the company, goes somewhere else and finds out it's something else, that's one thing. But in the course of the audit, so that is another qualification. There are many qualifications. These are to be taken into account. So, if he has stolen goods, the second part, then 15 lakhs rupees purely theft of goods is not fraud unless it is something more has happened. If the stolen goods involved was 1,000 rupees, it doesn't matter, 500 rupees, 1,000. As of now, we don't have limits. The companies will say that they are going to specify limits up to which you report either to the audit committee, if it is there, or to the board of directors. And beyond that, you report to the central government, but that has not yet come. As of today, there is no. Now the next question is that you have come out, found out this particular thing in your limited review of accounts, let's say quarterly accounts under clause 41 of the listing agreement, you are doing your quarterly review and you found out that there is a fraud. Does it mean that you have to report this? Now section 141(12), as I said, says that this fraud you should have come across in the course of audit. Section 141(12) is of the Act, so therefore the audit should be in the course of your audit under the Act, obviously. But can you say that what you come across your limited review, the work you should do for your limited review is not part of your duties of your under the Act? It's very difficult because this is I see in practice that a person who comes for a quarterly audit, he is actually doing continuous work. It's not that ex-partner comes for limited review, he does only that part, he keeps his audit notes separate, and then for annual audit somebody else comes and he keeps his audit notes separate, and these two people don't communicate. That's a very, very rare. If that is the very rare situation, then the answer could be different. But otherwise, and there also the question is that you are only auditing the name of the firm. But other than that, what you are doing a continuous audit. If you come across in the limited review, and see that you have to again see that if you come across a fraud that has happened, see the word used is committed, not suspected, not merely some contradiction you found which you have not gone to the logical conclusion. You have found a fraud in your limited review. According to me, the better we use that under 141 you should. The next question is, I think it's a very generic question, section, ABC and Company. Now I'll read ABC and Company as ABC and Company Limited, and that's it's a limited company obviously, otherwise the question should not be there. Is there a requirement of obtaining prior approval of the audit committee for such transactions? If no, then what are the steps required under the new Act? What if ABC and Company is listed company as well? Now, what are the, see first of all, ABC has related party transaction. Is there a requirement of obtaining prior approval? If the company is of such size, of such nature like listed company, if under the Act, if it is required to have audit committee, then it needs to take approval, not direct prior approval, but it needs to take approval under section 177(4) subclause 4. 177 refers to the scope of the audit committee which the board is to lay down, but one of the mandatory requirements of the scope of reference is approval of audit related party transactions. Then the word prior is not there. So maybe you can argue that prior approval, unlike listing agreement, prior word is not there. So, but I think as a practical measure, the approval always has to be prior. Can you go to audit committee and say I have already committed related transaction, now you approve, and suppose they don't approve. So, as a good practice and an interpretation, you should take prior approval, but the section does not talk about that. Coming to the next part, if no, then what are the not steps? What are the steps required in the new Act? I think this would be redundant and it's too broad. I think a paper that what is the procedure required for under the new Act. What if ABC and Company is a listed entity as regards the approval of the audit committee? I think that is also there in clause 49. Clause 49 specifically refers to prior approval, so you need to take prior approval. There are, omnibus provisions are there under the amended listing agreement, second amendment, which came in September. And as per the company's bill, they also introduced a proviso that even for this section 177, omnibus advance approvals they are going to allow. But in what manner? That is what the rules will provide. That also once the Act comes.
I just want to supplement this. Is that approval is always prior approval. It is the interpretation given by full-time member of SEBI in a particular forum like this. The question came up saying that whether approval is prior approval or post-approval, what was the question? The answer given was exactly the same lines as Jayanti said. Approval is approval, there is nothing like prior approval. That is, before you do the act, you should take approval. There is no point in saying, "Is I आपका घर में बहू लाया आप list करो." तो वो तो आ गई ना, क्या करना? तो approval तो करना ही पड़ेगा. If approval is not done, what will happen? The both will get out of the house. That's why it's not happen. So prior approval has no meaning at all. Approval is approval, very clear, and therefore drawers has to be prior. Is the interpretation given by SEBI, full-time member, not forms. And secondly, omnibus approval again was an interpretation or explanation given under listing 49. the omnibus approval would mean that in a routine basis, the related parties will keep doing transactions. For example, a related company is the only sole supplier of the component that is required by the other company in the whole of the country, and you can't get it from outside at all. So this is going to happen on a regular basis. Or for the purposes of this tax advantages, whatever, I create a company to provide me a particular spare part. And the routine is going to happen. In that case, you can have omnibus approval saying that during this year or during the next period of 3-4 years, I am going to take this kind of a component from my related party at so and so price. You can always take omnibus approval. Then you have to go back to our company for every transaction level. That's very clearly established now. The same omnibus approval interpretation given by listing agreement is coming into the act is what we believe, and therefore omnibus is a good thought that we can always consider. The only question that comes up, incidental question that comes up is whether audit committee is a executive committee or is a review committee. So long as so far it has been only a review committee, it is not an executive committee. But the moment you start talking about approvals, audit committee takes the view of executive committee. Therefore, a fundamental principle question comes in: the independent directors who are independent directors on the audit committee, will they continue to be independent directors or they become executive directors of the company? Is a broader question which nobody has so far raised in strict sense of the term. I feel that if it goes into Supreme Court, the constitutional issues can come up with this. That doesn't matter. But as far as we are concerned, audit committee approval is always a priority.
So just more one thing, since this is very practically important. The financial limit of omnibus approval is kept at a pathetic low amount of 1 crore. Would not pose a practical problem? As you said, review, approve, and then review it every quarter. So it's virtually function of execution.
Yeah, I think the omnibus is the financial limit. There's no limit.
Omnibus approval can be of omnibus approval can be of any amount. But more than that, even beyond omnibus, 1 crore is they can give.
That's what. It's a 1 crore is considered non-material for the purpose of this prior approval kind of thing. That's all. But otherwise, omnibus approval, there is no financial limit at all. So, question number 11 is apparently tricky, but I think simple to answer. It says that it's a hospital run by professional doctors, and professional doctors are also on the management of the company. So, what are the issues? Since they are looking after their own professional practice as well as they are not full-time directors, in that case, whether a company can pay remuneration to them, whether a company need to file returns under MR1 to 196, whether a company can appoint many of them as managing director even though he is having his own professional practice. And there is one opinion that the doctor should be appointed as executive director, though they have understanding. There is no such concept of executive director in Companies Act 2013, whether the view is correct. But the written appointment will have to be filed if these directors are appointed executive directors. 196 is applicable only in case appointment of managing director, whole-time director, or manager. I think we should have a clarity between terms of employment and the role of managing director, etc. There is no bar from the Companies Act perspective for a person doing more than one jobs. Okay, so he can be managed of your company and can still be doing portal waiter job if he feels in the evening. There is nothing, no bar on that from the Companies Act point of view. But the Companies Act, the company and the employment rule will say you cannot be in any other job. So long as you are working for my company, you cannot take any other job. It need not necessarily be at managing director level, it could be across any level. At any level, a person, as per the employment terms, he may be doing only that job, he may not be allowed to do any other job. That could be terms of employment and not a part of Companies Act provision. Therefore, any person who is an employee and a director is a whole-time director. Who is an employee and a director becomes whole-time director. That is how the law says. Earning outside the job has no relevance to this provision. It could be term of employment contract. If you want to prevent that, you put a condition in your employment saying that you cannot do any other job and therefore preventing from doing practice if you want to. But as such, Companies Act does not come in your way. It is true that there is no concept of executive director in the Act, but ED is usually executive whole-time director. If you look at the usage of the word executive director, the word independent director is there in place, and then people who are executives of the company, They are also directors of the board. They are getting called as executive directors, independent directors, executive directors, employee directors, non-employee directors, the various terms used. Executive director, in my understanding, will be a person who is an executive and also director of the board. That's how it should be looked at it. And there is no bar under the act or mandate doing the professional practice. There is no bar at all. Again, I am saying, if you want to prevent it, bring it as a part of the employment conditions. The next question is about the question number 12, which says 187C states limits of borrowing. Whether loan from directors will fall in this category, loan from directors will fall in this category. Exemption is given only to temporary loan from banks and ordinary course of business. So, in the given situation, majority of companies may have exceeded the limit of borrowing. This section was made effective from so and so, and so as on what date some private limited company had loans more than prescribed limit, does it have to pass resolution for the old loans, or is the resolution needed for future loans only? Lender is not relevant as far as borrowing limits is concerned. Lender is loan from director, maybe because of different reason you may have to take a different action, but as far as the limits is concerned, whoever is the lender doesn't really matter. We have to look at the amount as absolute amount. If the company has borrowed, 181C kicks in. That's what is important here. A narrow reading of the code suggests that resolution is necessary only borrowing is proposed. If you look at that 187C, I have given it here below. To borrow money, when the money to be borrowed together with money already borrowed will exceed the agreement to do something. Therefore, the resolution is required when you propose to borrow, not when you already borrowed. So the question here is, for all the existing borrowings before the date of effectiveness of this particular act, if there are already some subsisting borrowings and whatever has been done, hopefully properly done, then no action is required now until you review them. That's my view.
Page 79 now. I mean, this is more than interesting. This is yet another area I said money create creating a lot of difficulties. What the question reads is that in the context of private limited companies, what essentially the question is, I think to some extent was in an earlier question too, but here focused, the question is that if a private company wants to enter into transactions and there is no real outside interest, in the question, one example has been given to make the point more clear, but the question is that if there is no real outside interest, should section 188 be applied?